That's the context.
Yeah.
In the ancient world.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that you had to be there. Otherwise, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, Melchizedek was kind of like the Epstein of the late Bronze Age. But we're not talking about sex today. We're talking about violence. Because this is a family program. We only talk about family-friendly topics.
Wait, violence is family-friendly since what? Well, I guess there's the people who'd argue...
Nothing more family than violence.
Yeah, I guess technically you don't get domestic violence without family. Okay, that's not a funny joke. I'm sorry.
I mean, like, it's interesting how parents are very, very calm about violence in children's media. But you mention titis, and people go wild as if babies don't drink from the titis, you know? Anyway, let's carry on.
Yeah, so for anyone who isn't aware, to give a bit of context as to why we're even doing this, or rather why we're using this as a background. So, Total War Pharaoh.
It seems
a very, very, very shitty game. But the nice thing about shit is you can use it to grow even better shit. So, with that, it's worth noting that a lot of the things that, and again, it's completely possible that's just going to be just a shitty game with a little bit more width to it. So I do want to contextualize this. But originally when it was released, it only had, well, actually, I do need to pull it up as well. So I need to open the game in the meantime. So I'm going to share this video real quick and then we'll get started. But basically, it started out with basically its limits being as far south as Nubia, as far north as not even the not I don't even think it goes to the Black Sea, but like basically parts of Anatolia. Furthest east you go is honestly, the furthest east you go is maybe like Tadmor, which is Palmyra, and the furthest west you go is going to be maybe like halfway through the middle of Anatolia. So it is not a good map as is. I just want to put that out here. So what they're changing is they're adding basically most of the like Greek islands, and I think also like just the Greek mainland as well. But they're also going to add Mesopotamia. I think potentially even Elam. I'm not sure though. And
I think
yeah, no, go ahead.
Which is the Elamite name for their own country. So they add the region of Elam, but maybe not an Elamite faction. I would be surprised if they didn't add an Elamite faction, actually.
Interesting. All right. So let's see. Is this? Oh, okay. Interesting. So they're 8 hours ago. 5 days. Okay, we'll start with a video from 5 days ago. Or actually, it was, 103.
Ruin the world or save it, it's all in the hands of the player.
So they're adding Troy, for instance, with the Lulu stock.
How boring. And like the Total War fans who love to bitch about this game. Now let's watch. Or don't want to finish it?
Oh no, we're going to finish. I just realized. You know what this means? That they're going to be adding the Greek gods as well.
Yeah, because I think the previous one suffered from a severe problem in the eyes of many gamers. It was not centered on Europe. And let's be honest, Total War gamers have always been very Eurocentric. And for a very long time, Creative Assembly has more or less played into that sort of attitude, with a few exceptions being Shogun in Japan, which is the white supremacist's favorite non-white civilization. And because it was mythologized along the lines of white supremacy. And also China, because China is a market in and of itself. It's the first time they actually undertook a project focused on the Near East, rather than simply tacking on the Near East to a European-centered project, which I think was something that was very difficult for a lot of fans to swallow. Past the real game.
Yeah, sorry. Wait. Usal just said that's a stretch. You want to clarify what you're saying that's a stretch to? Because there's a lot of things that were said. But
well,
I was just going to say, so if I'm getting this correct, you're telling me that a AAA game studio caters to a Eurocentric audience. Who would have?
Yeah.
Wait, like are you telling me that's a reality?
I mean, obviously there are lots of Middle Eastern players of Total War games, but they don't have the same kind of economic pull as Europeans, North America.
They have. Sorry, go ahead.
Creative Assembly released their DLC for Rome 2, featuring, different playable factions in Sub-Saharan Africa, in North Africa, and in Arabia. There was an enormous backlash from a lot of the players, irrespective of the quality of the DLC, but simply by including forced diversity, as if these nations that existed historically and were incredibly powerful historically were not worthy to be in a game of this time period simply because they were not European or were not core to the narrative of European history.
And, the irony is, if only people knew more about the Phoenicians.
Well, I think this particular DLC that I'm referring to was covering, like, the Numidians, particularly.
I see. Sorry, I thought we were still talking about this.
The Chians. They, for some reason, they don't seem to mind Carthage, because Carthage has been sort of brought into the milieu of this classical Mediterranean civilization to a greater extent than Sub-Saharan Africa, Arabia, or even North Africa outside of the Tunisian coast.
Also, don't forget to sprinkle in a little bit of Delenda Carthago Est.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are sympathetic to Carthage because, Hannibal is just such a charismatic leader that even the Romans respected him, and that carries through to today. Oh, we're talking. Well, let's leave the politics behind. I think we already alienated half our audience just in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah. So, anyway.
Dynasty update in 3 words. Awesome marriages to different people. That's more words.
To different people? Is that implying polygamy?
I'm guessing it's either implying polygamy. Well, did they have like arranged these sort of marriage arrangement mechanics in the base game?
No, not in Pharaoh.
I'm guessing that it's probably not including polygamy, although polygamy was widely practiced at this time, particularly by the Egyptian pharaohs, which we could talk about as a part of the mechanics. We get into that.
Yeah, it's definitely is interesting because a lot of their other recent games, they did have these marriage mechanics, so I don't know why they took them out. It's something that really gave Crusader Kings an up on them, and now reintroducing this, it seems like they kind of have a little bit more competition going on. At least mechanical. Sorry, a bit of indigestion. But yeah, so let's see, Dynasty system. Oh, interesting. You got the nice Scar of Shamash. Well, that's not creepy at all. Talk about a floater. Okay, let's see. Where's the next one? Let's see. 5 days ago. This one actually goes into a bit of detail.
The Bronze Age, a time of epic heroes and unending strife. I'm Steve Coleman, joined today by 𝉌Total𓌝War, exploring the massively expanded campaign map coming in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. So let's start with the top line of everything that's been added to the campaign map. New settlements, factions, what have we got?
Yes, what we did was get the campaign map of Pharaoh and expand it significantly to the west and to the east, and a smidgen to the north, with a lot of new factions that you can play as, fight against, or ally or barter with. There are a number of new settlements, about 160 new ones, in fact, and about 100 new factions, I believe. Some of them are major players, major factions, because we introduced that distinction in the game with the Dynasty update. There are major factions like the ones that you have already played in Pharaoh, and there are also minor factions that are a lot more in number, and they're mainly there to provide the player with an additional starting position opportunities. They allow the player also to play as significant Bronze Age players, kingdoms or tribes, and also they are there because they are either characters from the Gilead related to the Aegean region, or they are there because they are related to characters from Pharaoh, like Setnacht.
Setnacht is Ramesses' father, right? Where does he start?
Yes, exactly. This is the father of Ramesses III, and he starts in the Western Desert, very close to the coast of the Mediterranean. And from this position, he's got the option to expand further into the desert to the west, to the south. Also, in both places, he's likely to be fighting against Libyan tribes. Also, he can go to the east, where he will inevitably meet with his son Ramesses and perhaps form an alliance to get an easier time getting the crown.
The Western Desert is just a jaunt across the ocean to Greece, right? So how did you approach combining Troy with Pharaoh?
Well, first of all, we had to scale down the campaign map for Troy in order for it to fit the scale of Pharaoh's campaign map. That means that some settlements had to be dropped, and there are about 80 new settlements that are included in the Aegean portion of the map. We also had to rework some of the character art because we wanted to make them more historic. Their armors were a bit more flamboyant, and I'm looking at you, Hector, and you, Achilles. So another thing that we had to compromise with was the presence of the Amazons. We could find no feasible explanation on why they would be present in actual history, so there are no Amazons.
But you have added the Black Sea?
There's one person who, if only he was a gamer, he would be so pissed at that. He'd be like, "No, the Amazons are Scythians, and you know, including them is." I mean, like, technically, they should have definitely included the Amazons as Scythians, but I mean, I don't know. It did just remind me. There's some people who it's like, "Oh, when you not include the Scythians, you got to include the Scythians." Which, I mean, to be fair, got to include the Scythians, but there's some people who make it weird.
Well, I think they're a little bit anachronistic for the late Bronze Age.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, I mean, maybe the Scythians, but like, what about tribes related to them or who they descended from?
There was, the late Bronze Age was kind of the time when a bunch of different Proto-Indo-European cultures were sending out waves of migration in every direction from the homeland, which is in north of the Caucasus. So it certainly would not be definable as Scythian. And while there was some degree of horse riding in the late Bronze Age, it wouldn't be anything equivalent to the horse-based culture of the Scythians.
Interesting, because a lot of people who they want to imply that all this culture came. Oh, yeah. So, well, yes. I mean, this would but I don't. Technically, that wouldn't really be the Scythians at that point. Wouldn't that be more Yamnaya?
Yeah, the Yamnaya culture would have been the culture present in the area is traditionally referred to as Scythian.
But yeah, there is this weird. Oh, were you still talking?
No.
Oh,
Go.
But yeah, kind of going in with this whole idea of the Eurocentrism, the people who want to imply that all this culture came to the ancient Near East from some quote-unquote Europeans, a lot of times they'll want to use the Scythians as their go-to. And again, the Scythians did, or, again, it kind of goes to the issue of even the terms that we're using, but basically these Proto-Scythians, they did bring a lot of culture. But the thing is, to act like they introduced this culture, no. They brought their own, it's kind of like a potluck. They brought what they had. They took a little bit of what the people they, ended up settling around. They took a little bit of what they had. And then people they settled around, those people took a little bit of what the people brought and then also shared a little bit of what they had. It's a give and take. And anyone claiming that culture is a one-way street is just honestly a bit delusional.
Mm-hmm.
Like even manufactured culture, it doesn't go one way because inevitably it's going to get reworked.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Everything is influenced by everything else. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yes, we added the Black Sea because we really wanted to have a complete map of Anatolia, and the Black Sea coast is right over there, so there was no reason not to include it. We also discovered that when we were right over there, so there was no reason not to include
dang it. Wait, here.
Complete map of Anatolia, and the Black Sea coast is right over
there. There. If I get rid of the captions, you can see it. Palagoni. Wait, the Paphlagonians.
Well, talking about anachronism.
Oh, is that another one?
Was the King𓀶people who were present in the Black Sea coast region of Anatolia. And they gave a lot of trouble for the Hittites. In fact, when they made an alliance with the Hurrian kingdom of 𝉌Canaanite𓀺Yankees, they almost wiped the Hittites off the map.
Interesting.
In the early 14th century BCE.
And this group was called what again?
The King𓀶ans.
Oh, right. So, sorry, I thought you were saying it was... Sorry, I'm very easily distracted. Because I also saw what Graham said was saying, in my opinion, the name you're looking for is the Andronova culture, which existed from approximately... Yeah?
Probably the Andronova. It's easy to get these archaeological names mixed up, but I'm not an Indo-Europeanist. I'm a Europeanist. Just kidding.
Speaking of Europeanist, you might want to reframe where the camera's pointed.
Oh. Okay.
over there, so there was no reason not to include it. We also discovered that when we combined the regions from Troy and from Pharaoh, that there is a significant gap right in the middle portion of Western Anatolia, so we had to add a few regions over there. But now Anatolia is complete. You can conquer the whole of it. And
wait, is this the Yam or is this Yam? I'm not sure, but if it's Yam, Yam's Ship of Curses. I love that name.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
I think there's more influence of Canaanite culture now, because before that, no one knew about the god Yam. I think people knew about Baal, but Yam was kind of obscure. So I think we've been making a lot of progress, really.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I've recently, especially with all this earthquake imagery that's associated with, with the god Yah, that, ends up becoming, like what people understand as the Jewish or, later like the Christian god.
Do you think that he's from Yam? I'm just curious.
One of the theories I've heard, I personally didn't think this made much sense, but I've been seeing more stuff that kind of supports it. But basically that it might have been another title for him, or that it might have been like kind of going back to this primordial like Yah, and then it got like that because if you think about it, Yah isn't like Yah could be like Yah or it could be Ya'aha, whereas Yam is and so like with that there is a Yah in Yam, and so it's like basically I think the argument is that the whole tradition of Yahweh developed from the tradition of Yah, And then basically that Yah was just another name or like another title for. Personally, I think that the Yah fits a bit more with some of the Baal imagery, but then again, it's also a lot of things mushed into one, so that could explain it. Because personally, and like this is one thing that I've always kind of found interesting, that Baal is kind of like Baal's demonized, but if you actually follow the narrative, he's kind of not as cruel as the biblical god.
Oh no, he's just outright heroic and selfless constantly. He has moments where he has rage and fury, but he feels shame and remorse for any bad action he takes. He feels shame for killing Yam, his greatest enemy, and he defeats the god of death not by killing him in battle, but by making peace with him. So if anything, Baal is overwhelmingly morally superior to the Judeo-Christian god. But we're talking about, let's keep on topic. Let's keep it on topic.
Yeah.
We're already 30 minutes in.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't even talked about the ancient Near Eastern warfare yet.
Okay. All right. Just real quick. Graham said, Usal, I don't know about you, but I get my weed from the dispensary down the street. And then Yam, Ship of Curses, said, I used to have Sage of Sidon, but then I evolved. Okay, yeah, I recognize him. All right, so here, getting back into this.
You can carve another Hittite empire for yourselves if you want to.
And Mesopotamia has been added as well, right? It looks absolutely stunning. What inspired the art style of this region? Are there any landmarks that you're particularly proud of?
For Mesopotamia, we really wanted to create the impression of the cradle of civilization kind of place in the world, where you have fertile land surrounded by hostile territory, much like it is in Egypt, but it also had to look and feel distinct from Egypt. And it's not that hard because there is a single great river in Egypt, the Nile, and there are two of those in Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So right in the middle, you can find yourself a safe zone, a safe area, because both rivers are natural borders that protect you somewhat from invading tribes from the southwest or those Elamites from the east. They're always there, the Elamites. As for any particular landmarks, the city of Babylon is there with a unique battle map inspired by the actual layout of the city at the time, and it's really, really, really impressive. And in addition to that, 𝉌Canaanite𓀺Yankees, which we have added as a monument on the campaign map that you can interact with as an outpost. This structure was built 800 years roughly before the events of the game, but is still standing over there today, monument to the entire civilization of humanity.
So there we are, 2 new land masses, 168 new settlements, 95 new factions, and the inclusion of playable minor factions. We'd love to know who you'll be starting out with, but our next dev diary might just sway your answer. We'll be heading to Mesopotamia.
So I think they have one more update, and this is from 8 hours. Wait, yeah, 8 hours. And then that'll be the perfectly transition into actually talking about it.
Homer's Iliad describes the Trojan War in epic poetry. But what really happened? I'm Steve Coleman, joined today by Todor Nikolov, defining our own Aegean history. All right, Mycenae, we know these guys. How do they play?
The Mycenaeans are led by Agamemnon, and they're all about conquest and expansion. They're extremely adept at pacifying conquered territories. They also have benefits for their buildings from when their high influence is achieved. So when you conquer territories and you pacify them, you quickly make them more efficient than other factions would. In addition to that, their command grants them access to instantly recruited units and ancillaries that scale with the level of the faction leader. So when you get your faction leader to a high level, you can instantly buff their army, which will help them get out of tight spots.
Okay, it sounds to me like they'd be a good fit for the Atreus
Sorry,
Ancient Legacy.
it's a
Yes.
more focused on mechanics as opposed to lore, and I feel like the mechanics is a bit. Yeah. So, all right. I guess this is a good place to transition. Actually, talking about the game. So, where do you want to start?
Well, I think we should we'll talk about the geopolitical situation of the ancient Near East as pertains to the late Bronze Age, particularly the end of the late Bronze Age. To put it in context, a historical context. So the late Bronze Age is actually often mythologized as this golden age of civilization. This is the height of the Bronze Age. But this is probably because our view of the Bronze Age is so influenced by the preoccupation with Egypt. And it's not hard to see why. Egypt leaves us these glorious monuments, these great records, as with their temples in Medinet Habu and Karnak and all these other impressive sites detailing battles. But from what we know, the late Bronze Age was in many ways a decline in material culture from the Middle Bronze Age as it continues to slide into a greater degree of warfare. And the collapse, I think, of the Amorite city-state system in the regions of Syria and Mesopotamia led to the rise of new people groups coming in.
King of the Hittites.
And of course, the main one being the Egyptians. And the Egyptians, they dominate in Canaan for several hundred years with different hiccups, and they eventually end up battling the Hittites. But then they make peace with the Hittites, you know? So the period of this game is the very end of the late Bronze Age, in the 1100s BCE. Egypt had basically been in peace with the Hittites for close to 100 years at this point, and their threats was rather one of internal decline, internal division, and climactic environmental disasters that also preempted migrations of different people groups from the periphery into the centers of civilization in the Levant, in Anatolia, in Egypt, and Mesopotamia. The game, Total War Pharaoh, correct me if I'm wrong, is about the rise of Ramses III, or at least in this time period, from the succession of Setnakhte, which is actually quite an obscure time in the history of Egypt. The sources are not actually very well detailed for this time period, especially outside of Egypt itself, which is why I was actually very puzzled why did they choose this time period, until I thought, oh, yeah, because they're going to want to do something with the Sea Peoples. I thought an earlier period in the late Bronze Age would have made a lot more sense because there's so much more records as to different rulers in that time period in the Hittite Empire, not just in Egypt, but also in Canaan, Mesopotamia, etc. They make it very difficult for themselves by choosing this time period, which lacks depth for its historical personages, particularly outside of the main character, Ramses III.
Interesting.
He's sort of dealing with a succession and civil war following the death of his father. And to put it into context, it's quite similar, I guess, to the Eight Princes DLC of Total War 3 Kingdoms, in that it's not a particularly interesting or important time in the history of Egypt, but for some reason they thought that, okay, we'll go with that. It's just a very, very typical and generic power struggle in which one faction ends up winning out in a context of the decline of Egyptian power and imperialism.
Interesting. And so you're saying Ramses was the son of Setnacht?
Yeah, the son of Setnachte, who had founded the 20th dynasty of Egypt. So after Merneptah, who was the 12th son of Ramses II, the famous Ramses II, you know, the Colossus sort of Ramses II, you know, the Battle of Kadesh Ramses II. After he died, very, very old, like at the youngest, like 91. Some estimates put him at 99 when he died. So he outlived all of his first 11 children, and his 12th child, Merneptah, succeeded him already as an old man in his 70s. And for whatever reason, the succession was not clear, so Setnachte was able to, with some incidental relation to the pharaoh, which is very ambiguous, because everything in antiquity is ambiguous, unless it's glorifying the pharaoh, you know? The current pharaoh, he came to power and founded the 20th dynasty, and the story is about his successor, Ramses III, who is considered the last great pharaoh of the New Kingdom.
Interesting. So, for the sake of demonstrating this, what faction do you think we should choose? So we have Ramses, Seti, Tausret, Amenmesse, and then there's also the Canaanites, where you have
Toggle for like other Total War games.
Sorry, what?
Is there an option to use codes to toggle the fog of war?
I think that's by default.
Okay, I think we will go with Bay, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry, one more time, you cut out.
Go with Bay.
Oh yeah.
Of an inaccuracy kind of baked into the gameplay, because they have Bay, who was a historical vizier in Egypt, but they make his power base in Canaan, in the city of Tyre. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, it's correct.
And I think it just, in general, there's a lot of issues with trying to represent an ambiguous period in history, and make it a balanced strategy game along the model of Total War Troy.
Interesting. Yeah. Sorry, yeah?
They wanted to create heroes and charismatic historical figures, but the sources did not provide them with a convenient narrative with which to do that, I think. Was one of my initial critique that made me reluctant to try this game. If they had chosen instead the Amarna period, they would have had a wealth of fascinating historical characters for every section of the map.
Interesting. And just to be clear, you also know about Irsu, and then also right by Bay is Waluetes, which is a Placet. But yeah, I like Bay. Bay's my favorite. Just wanted to be sure that's what you want to choose.
He is the best because he's your favorite, and he's the closest thing to a typical Canaanite monarch as is portrayed in this game. And he's in a good central location as the game goes.
Yeah. All right.
So,
yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to introduce.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we look at the map, I guess. You notice that the map is not state focused. It's more character focused, like Total War games like Total War Troy and Three Kingdoms. You don't see the borders of the Hittite Empire. You see the borders of one ruler in the Hittites. I think they have Shuppiluliuma II and an alternate who was...
Yeah, the alternate is Korunta, who I think there's like the narrative is like he basically like there's also a god Korunta, and he's like the avatar of it or something.
weird. Like I said, they chose a very ambiguous and transitional period for themselves. I guess because they wanted to have this artistic license in depicting a lot of it. But I also think that it's limiting in terms of their material they can work with. Never look back. Is that him saying something?
Yeah. Oh wow! And you can see all the. But I guess by selecting the different. By selecting the different sea people factions, you can actually see all the sea peoples. This is wild. So.
No, they really love those sea peoples. They don't love the Hurrians, though.
Let's see. So they have the. What is this? You have the Luca, you have the Jeker, you have the Pleshet, you have the Teresh, you have the Shekelesh, you have the...
Wow, that guy looks nothing like a Sheridan. That guy looks more like Brad Pitt than he does like a Sheridan.
Well, you know, they've got to have their white-looking Europeans.
Yeah. And of course, Sardinians are the whitest, most European-looking Europeans. They look just like Norwegians, you know. If you go to Sardinia, they all look like Vikings, you know.
This is a joke, right?
Actually, kind of not, because they do have those horned helmets that make them, you know, look like the stereotypical Vikings. It was actually historically accurate to give them horned helmets, but for some reason, Vikings go with that.
The Vikings didn't, though, right?
Yeah, the Vikings didn't. No, that was created by Wagner.
Interesting.
That idea of it is a 19th century invention, but it's interesting that they chose to depict the Sheridans in such a boring and generic and historically inaccurate fashion when we have so many depictions of the Sheridans relative to any other of the Sea Peoples. We know what their military dress was like. We know more about their culture and their history than any of the other Sea Peoples. And they are frankly badass with their gigantic horned helmets and their massive swords, which they torn down a lot, actually.
Interesting. And then oh, sorry, yeah.
Sort of like the shock infantry of the ancient Mediterranean.
The stormtroopers.
And they were known as mercenaries, so they were already well involved in the Near East long before the Bronze Age collapse.
Interesting. And I do just feel like I do need to mention this. This one guy's named 𝉴Canaanite𓀺Yankees. Sounds like Dragon Card. But yeah, you have all these different...
My Dragon Card!
And then Kanajami is the Jeker leader. But anyway, so let's actually get into this. So Bai is the supreme survivor and master manipulator. Appearing weak and friendly to deceive his adversaries comes naturally to Bai, who is watching the spoils of high Egyptian society from afar. And what's kind of interesting is I actually think there's a lot of parallels to the point that the figure of Joseph might have actually been taken from a mythologization of Bai.
It's not impossible. I mean, like, the idea of the Canaanite vizier is deeply rooted in the history of Egypt. Canaanites were seen in a specific light as, on one hand, they can be treacherous or even barbaric, but the other hand, settled Canaanites could be regarded by Egyptians as even more sophisticated and settled than themselves. Bai represents this duality of deceit but also sophistication that the Canaanites held in the Egyptian court, which is why so often in the bureaucracy, Egyptians would use Canaanites, even in the highest position. For example, the vizier of Amenhotep III, Aperel, which is simply an Egyptian reading of the Canaanite name Abdi Ilu.
Interesting. it's kind of eerie, if I'm being honest, because of how similar some of that stuff is to how Jews were treated by Europeans, like by European monarchies.
It's no accident. This reputation that Jewish people have is kind of a carryover of how more powerful civilizations viewed Canaanites. It's almost a complete transference. All the negative stories about Jews come from it, and all the positive stories, or ambiguously positive ones, I guess, in the case of the cunning vizier.
Wow. That, especially because I know some of the first instances of what people would like now recognize as anti-Semitism. Again, like that term's become so it's hard to explain. Basically that was it that some of the first examples of really what is Jew hatred can actually be seen in the works of Manetho, who is an Egyptian priest.
And I don't think Manetho particularly hated Jews because they were Jewish. I think it was because of a long, deep-seated Egyptian prejudice against Canaanites. Because it's easy to see that the Egyptians may have seen their empire as being built, through the conquest of Canaanites, but then saw a Canaanite dynasty, the 19th, end up slipping the power from the hands of Egypt back to the Canaanites. So you have the story of, I believe, Wenamun, where an Egyptian emissary of the Pharaoh gets swept off course and lands in Byblos, and he finds a very cold welcome from the king of Byblos, who was once one of Pharaoh's biggest, pissants. That it was symbolic of that Egypt no longer could have any influence over even what was previously the most loyal Canaanite vassals.
Interesting. And so I think with that, it's almost kind of similar to how when like with the beginning of Christianity, when Christians were being persecuted by Romans, it wasn't for being Christian. It was because they were Jews and they were being seen as what's the term, like what's the term? They were like subversive.
Yeah, well, the Romans were very suspicious of any exclusive and secretive groups. The Roman government even banned, voluntary firefighting organizations for this reason. And it was not out of religious persecution that they persecuted Christians or Jews. They saw them honestly, in fact, based some basis on reality, as a secretive, exclusive group promising some sort of specific truth that was subversive to the state. And it's no surprise that the Romans would persecute them primarily for political reasons rather than for religious reasons, as is often supposed.
I mean, that being said, I don't think it has that much to do with religion, because Judaism was given an exemption by the Romans.
Yeah, the Jews were originally treated with special privileges by the Romans. If you read there's an ancient text I was reading when I was in uni about sort of instructions given by the Roman administration for taxation and government donations to different institutions. And it sort of laid out a hierarchical racial structure, let's say, with Romans at the top, but there being so few Romans, then the Greek elite that existed from the previous Ptolemaic regime. At the bottom is the Egyptians, but in this weird middle state, a minority that's below the Hellenes and the Romans were the Jews, and the Roman state provided water and maintenance for Jewish synagogues in Egypt, with the status higher for a Jew, higher than that of a native Egyptian, which is perhaps why Egyptians like Manetho had such a disdain for Jews, because they were seen as, well, Egyptians were third-class citizens in their own country, and they see this other minority group who's not even the ruling, minority being treated better than them, naturally they would not be very fond of that.
Interesting. It's kind of eerie with some of the stuff that modern day like modern day people who like they say like, oh, Jews control the country or whatever. It's like they ignore the complex history of power politics and using different populations against each other. But like it's eerie because I was actually talking about this with some people last night. That's like basically with a lot of people who have like significant power, which it's not that many people in the grand scheme of things, that they'd rather just portray another group as being responsible for the deterioration of the quality of life in various countries, but especially like in parts of the Western world. And
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that they'll blame one group or another, whether it's immigrants, or they'll blame people who they say are responsible for bringing immigrants. But at the end of the day, it's like, in the grand scheme of things, the immigration isn't what's changed. It's something else.
Yeah, it's usually going to be mass migration is going to be brought upon by environmental factors or economic factors. And the same thing you see in the ancient Near East. The population of Canaanites in the Egyptian Delta was probably higher than the population of Canaanites in Canaan proper, because so many Canaanites moved to the Delta to escape the, let's say, inconsistent agricultural conditions of southern Canaan. And this is a condition that existed, constantly. I think a logical explanation for the origin of Judaism is presumably from these Delta Canaanites incorporating some aspects of Egyptian religion and some aspects of Canaanite religion together to make, some sort of hybrid religion.
Yeah, it reminds me. There's this one passage that actually I ended up having to try and drill this into figuratively, of course, drill this into this one person's head who was convinced. He was like, "Oh, Jews, they don't like Egyptians because of the Exodus narrative, and it wasn't even real." And it's like, I was trying to explain to him how a lot of it's mythological, but then also Jews don't hate Egyptians. This just isn't a thing. I mean, you might have some, but like this isn't a thing. And
I know Jews who hate Egyptians, but it's for modern political reasons, not because of the Exodus myth.
Yeah, and also to contextualize this, the person I'm talking about, he I actually don't know like how. Either way, he's Coptic, so this has nothing to do with the modern politics, especially because Coptics tend to be pro-Israel, because of the. I mean, without getting into it, but basically, what I thought was interesting is there's literally something in Torah where it says, "You shall not mistreat an Egyptian, for you were a stranger in their land."
And of course, Egyptians were allied with the kingdom of Judah, and were essentially like the one thing holding back the Assyrians from conquering Judah. And you actually look at the end of the Book of Kings, and the prophets of that period, sort of towards the end of the kingdom of Judah, it's all about, they think that the king of Judah relies too much on his alliance with Egypt and on other foreign states, and not enough on God. And of course, as soon as Josiah screws up his relationship with Egypt, the kingdom very quickly falls to not Assyria, but to Babylon, which is essentially the Neo-Babylonians were the successors to the Neo-Assyrians. So the prophets were pretty much exactly opposite of what they predicted, but just because you're wrong doesn't mean you can't make yourself right, by spinning anything to your benefit after the fact, which is typical Hebrew prophet thing. Let's get on with the game. Why don't you start up a campaign? We can talk about the start playing, start working with the mechanics, and I can start talking about how the actual mechanics of Near Eastern power politics, diplomacy, military, economies worked.
All right.
As you start playing the game, giving some visual stimulation.
All right. Let's snake our way to the top. Are you able to hear?
No, it doesn't really matter, though. I'd rather just talk over it. Okay, I guess this is Setnacht.
Oh, no, it's Merneptah.
Oh, Merneptah. Okay. Yeah, he was a freaking old man when he came to power, but he was actually a pretty energetic military leader like his father, Ramses. I'm not a huge fan of how Egypt is typically portrayed in Western media.
Yeah.
No, I am the great Pharaoh,
There's this kind of like cheap, melodramatic dialogue that they tend to use in Egyptian dramas in Western media that always annoys me. Are you gonna eat that olive or what?
I think it looks like a grape.
The chosen
That's a grape?
and beloved of Amun.
Yeah.
Why does he have a British accent?
Ramses the Second.
Okay, this is dumb. Wee. Is this actually in the game?
Yes.
This is really dumb.
Egypt has flourished throughout my reign. Now I sense the eyes of Set.
The eyes of Seti are upon you all the livelong day.
This is really crappy.
You're telling me.
Hired to write this. They got paid for this.
There's your turban.
I like a lot of the character designs, though. They're not bad. Although a lot of their costumes look plasticky. But I guess it's kind of CGI. I am Merneptah. Back in my day, they wore an onion in their belt.
After my soul,
And they gave us a shekel of barley. We'd say it's 2 bees.
the eternal lands of the afterlife.
Nice foreshadowing.
I don't know why they draped it all over with, I don't know. They could have done a little bit more research with the setting.
One second. When I was young, I traveled the courts of powerful men, and through me they spoke to each other. Were some of these words occasionally... Oh, shoot, what just happened? Oh, no. Did it just...
It crashed?
It's probably just loading. Let me see if I can find the quote in the meantime. Let's see. They quote Total War Pharaoh. All right, now there's it.
Oh, I mean, like, I got to catch it.
Oh, wait, yeah. Were some of these words occasionally mine? Maybe. Rulers like me, humble bay, what is not to like? Their egos are soft clay, and I spin them into shape ever so gently. They never know and never will, until one day my smile is on their lips, my words on their tongues, my mind in their hearts.
Okay.
Talk about a propaganda.
Kind of reminds me of like the betrayal of Soviets, like the Soviet whatever, like Soviet propagandists from 1950s propaganda movies.
All right, so while we're waiting for it to load, I'm just going to read the comments. So Graham says, I blame the confusion on Amun, the amoeba of deities who absorb so many other deities into Amun's unknown. And then referencing the how Baal is moral. That's why his sister loves him and avenges him.
Mm-hmm.
Yam's ship of curses also blames everything on Amun too. Usal says the Shekelesh are coming. Let's see. Ramses the Renamer. It's not that hard to become quote unquote great when you go around taking credit for all the monuments built before you.
True.
And then Yam's ship says, I gotta get what Kohan is wearing in red. US? I'm not sure. Smiley face, love it, dude. Board game recommendation: Ancient Civilizations of the Middle East from GMT Games. Interesting. LOL. No Baldwins. I feel like I might be missing the reference. And then Yuya was a historical figure who was later part of the Joseph character.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Well, I mean, I've heard of Yuya. I'm not sure if that was necessarily related to Joseph. I feel like it's half the job of an archaeologist to keep track of all of the ways that some nut have connected a real historical figure to a mythical biblical figure. Obviously, the biblical myths are drawing off of real history because the concept of Joseph, like the Canaanite vizier who performs magic by interpreting dreams, existed. This Canaanite vizier existed, and I don't think even Bey is the best example of it, because he's the example of the Egyptian stereotype of the disloyal vizier. He's the one who orchestrated, I think, the harem conspiracy against Ramses III, which is actually one of the most interesting historical occurrences in Egypt.
Canaanites
here we go.
Are little more than barbarians, desperately clinging to the goodwill of my empire and the trade that Egypt brings to their shores. My liaison Bey works to pacify his fellow countrymen. Though Canaanite by birth, he is practically Egyptian in his learning and civility. His letters read like poetry, sharing wisdom with eloquence and making him proficient in diplomacy with his neighbors.
Well, that's pretty racist against Canaanites, isn't it?
But the
That little more than barbarians.
poised and ready to strike.
It is in line with Egyptian propaganda.
Hidden dagger, waiting to be plunged into Egypt's back.
I don't know if you have any headphones. Anyway, so this is a good time to talk about relationships of power in the ancient Near East. So, in the late Bronze Age, there were different hierarchies of power. At the top, there are the great kings, and they addressed each other as brothers. So Amenhotep III would address the king of Mitanni, Tushratta, as a brother, or the king of Babylon. And there were 5 great kings at the time of the Amarna letters, which would be the king of Egypt, the king of Babylon, the king of Mitanni, the king of the Hittites, and variously the king of Ahyawa or the king of Arzawa, depending on how you count them. Arzawa ends up losing power significantly after 𝉌Canaanite𓀺Yankees becomes the king of the Hittites. But these are the top, and then they have subordinate kings, who are just regular kings, but they can carry out a certain degree of independent policy. And I think the advantage of Total War Pharaoh using the character-based model is that they can kind of represent that fact. So they show Merneptah as being like this great king, and your playable characters, I guess, start out as subordinate to him.
Correct.
Yeah, and Bay, he's basically portrayed as a Canaanite vassal king in Tyre, which is not accurate because Bay he would be a vizier, so he would have been living with the Egyptian court. Essentially, he would be at the center of Egyptian power, not at the periphery.
Interesting. So, sorry, go ahead.
But they had to fill out the map, and they didn't have enough Canaanites, so they used the one Canaanite that was famous from this time, and they put him in this place in the map, which I think was an understandable but unfortunate choice. Trying to kind of have their cake and eat it too with historicity. And also, so this different levels of power. So, how do you recruit troops in this game?
I think it's based off of population. So, well, actually, that might have been a mod I had installed. And so right now we're not using any mods. So I guess we could just play a bit in order to kind of show that a bit. So to start with, just to be clear, you did want the Fog of War?
Yeah, I like the Fog of War off.
Oh, that's what you wanted off. Sorry. Let's see, is it too late to?
No worries. I like to be able to go around the map and see the different places, but I'm more interested in talking about the mechanics of the game and how they relate to the mechanics of the Egyptian state and general Near Eastern states based on what we know from different archives. The Amarna archive, the Nuzi archive, the 𝉴Canaanite𝓀ṛ archive, and the Ugarit archive. Because they actually tell us a lot about how states and militaries were organized in this period.
Let's see. So new, go to Canaanites Bay, campaign customization, load presets. Nice map. Confirm. So I should have the map set to.
I think just everything should be set to default except for
Also, do you want it where it has all gods discovered? That way we can see it. Because I mean, this isn't so much. Sorry,
yeah, sure. Every one of the gods. To be honest, the religion aspect of it, I'm curious how religion plays a role in the gameplay. I've played other Total War games before. I think the mechanics of troop recruitment in the Total War games that I've played is you recruit a certain type of barracks and you're limited to recruiting a certain number of units per turn at different settlements, I guess, which is not really historically accurate, obviously. They would do a levy of however many troops they want to do for the particular campaign, and the cost associated would be primarily on the upkeep of these soldiers. And they would be expected to, at least in the Egyptian case, they'd be expected to serve in the military. One, because it's a form of corvée, which is how, since Egyptians did not really pay taxes to the pharaoh, they tended to, do the equivalent through corvée labor, either in the military or in construction projects. But the other thing that they would do, the other thing that they would receive is, of course, spoils, which was the most desirable thing about joining the military. But they tend to structure these games, I think, around a modern conception of military, where you hire soldiers. The better soldiers cost more because the state pays for the equipment. But in reality, mostly troops paid for their own equipment out of pocket, outside of the most basic stuff. At least for the elites, they would have to pay for their own horses. They'd pay for their own chariot, their own armor,
Interesting. So that's just, honestly, that's really hard for me to comprehend.
Warfare was an economic opportunity and also sort of a noble game. Like, nobility in antiquity and in the Middle Ages sort of treated warfare as like the ultimate game. They could use it to enrich themselves because obviously the rich got the most benefit out of warfare. And it was also a diversionary activity. The Egyptian royalty sort of portrayed their military campaigns in the same way they would a royal hunt for elephants or lions, as a manly activity that was a diversion for this military elite to show off how much better they were than the military elite of that neighboring kingdom. So, of course, there's the pragmatic, attitudes towards war, the propaganda value, the economic value of dominating a foreign region, but we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which war was essentially a game of the nobility.
Interesting. I honestly, it's just so far off of, kind of how we think about it now. So it makes it a lot harder to comprehend that way. But as fucked up as it does make sense. Okay,
it's truly not that far away from the conception of many people today. But the reality is that today we have the reality of a public that is against war. But at this time, there was no such thing as an anti-war public. War was seen as a prestigious sort of thing for a state to get involved with and for an individual to be involved with. They were concerned with the risks, of course, but it was seen very much as a prestigious venture and an economic venture as well. The human cost of it, outside of for one's own self and one's own peer group, was not considered by most of the elites until there was a moral revolution around the character of Baal. I think everything comes back to Baal somehow. And that's how they managed to essentially put aside the major wars for several hundred years.
Wow.
Because it no longer was a symbol of prestige. Wars should only be fought with a just cause.
All right. Right. I need just wait. What? Sorry. 1 moment. I just need to find something real quick. So in the meantime, I'm just going to pull up the thing about Mesopotamia, and then we'll continue. It'll just take 1 minute or so.
Mesopotamia. It's a whole new world to explore and conquer. I'm Steve Coleman, joined by Todor Nikolov, unearthing Mesopotamia's ancient empires. Let's start in Babylon. What makes them special? How do they play?
Well, Babylonians are generally the faction that builds tall. They want to get prepared before they march off on the offensive. So their buildings, for example, often combine different effects, so you can achieve more with a single building. Their command allows them to suddenly increase their recruitment capabilities, which helps both when you defend your lands and when you attack your enemies. And in addition, they have access to the city of Babylon, which is a one settlement province and is rather huge. In addition to that, they're relying on the god Marduk for a variety of bonuses that help them on the defensive, like unit upkeep and replenishment.
Yes, so the Mesopotamian gods, we've got Ninurta, Asher, Ishtar, 𝉝Canaanite𝓀ษ์and Marduk, right? And they have dwellings. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Dwellings is an additional building that represents the home of a particular god, and you can build a home to a god in every one of your settlements for an additional drop of favor and some god-specific effects. So you have your temples, have your shrines. If you are praying to Mesopotamian gods, you have your dwellings, and this means that you can actually maximize the favor tier to a god with much fewer territories, which is very valuable for the Babylonians in particular.
Okay, so it sounds like the Babylonians are quite an inward-looking faction. Marduk's a good fit for them god-wise, but what ancient legacy would you say would best suit them?
It would definitely be the ancient legacy of Hammurabi, the creator of one of the first code of laws. And this is what the player can do with the ancient legacy. They can have their own code of laws. And each law is a combination of effects that you choose from a list. And this might be both positive, which brings you bonuses, but also takes more time, or penalties. You can also put negative effects to reduce the time it takes for a law to be efficient. In addition to that, the more laws you have, the more Kuduru resource you receive. And you can spend this to instantly research royal decrees or also research greater and more powerful effects for your laws.
Great. Okay, so the opposite of an inward-looking faction might be an ambitious one. 𝉴Canaanite𝓀ษ์has entered the fray. What are they like?
Yes, 𝉴Canaanite�ษ์are actually a kingdom of Assyrians, and their ruler really very much likes to be the ruler of the entire Assyria. So they're much more on the offensive. They can recruit from very early in the campaign a lot of units. They can also create buildings which provide them with experienced generals that come at a very affordable price. And in addition to that, they also have horsemen from very early in the campaign. Horsemen are quite fragile, but also more maneuverable than chariots. Their faction command in particular grants them a resource, military training, which scales with the number of ongoing wars. And you can spend this resource to directly upgrade your units in an army of your choice, which means that you need to go completely total war. The more wars you are participating in, the stronger your armies will get.
Okay, so would you say they fancy themselves as a kind of king of the universe then?
Yes, quite. King of the Universe is actually the title of the supreme ruler of the Mesopotamian court. And the main difference between the Mesopotamian court and the court of other great powers at the time was that the Mesopotamian court and King of the Universe had under him not a vizier or a high priest or whatever. He had kings below him. And in the game, these are the king of 𝉴Canaanite𝓀ษ์, the king of Asher, the king of Elam, and the king of Babylon. Each of those positions, the lesser kings, comes with their own plots and intrigues and elite units. Actually, it's a bit of a trivia that the first king who used the King of the Universe title likely was Sargon of Akkad, Sargon the Great.
And to get their hands on the throne, the Sargon of Akkad ancient legacy sounds perfect.
Yes, quite. The ancient legacy of Sargon is all about ambition. With it, you can have more ambitions at a time. You can have control over what kind of ambitions you receive, because there are different ambition archetypes. Some are related to politics, some are related to warfare. By completing these ambitions of a certain archetype, you get points, which in turn unlock you additional bonuses that are relevant to the archetype. So if you complete warlike ambitions, you will get more bonuses that help you in war. In addition to that, with this ancient legacy, you gain access to grand ambitions, which provide you with the opportunity to complete more different and more difficult objectives. But also their rewards are much greater, and they provide you with victory points. And in this way, they are a valid way for you to achieve a campaign victory along with your ordinary conquering the world.
Prince of Ur and protector of Nippur.
So there we are, 1 new culture, 7 total playable factions, 2 new ancient legacies, new gods and related mechanics, and new regalia to chase. The ancient world is spilling its secrets, but next time let's go somewhere a little bit more familiar. We're heading back to the Aegean.
Well, okay, so this is really quite bothersome for me. So 𝉜Canaanite𓀺Yankees, for those who don't know, is simply the Akkadian rendering of the kingdom of Mitanni, which by the time of the 1100s BCE was practically a shadow of its former self. It was a vassal that could get kicked around between the Assyrians, which were the rising power at that time, and the Hittites. Ever since the sort of chaos following the death of Tushratta, the Mitannians quickly lost a lot of their power due to internal rebellions, power struggles. Now they went from great king status to just king status. And the game portrays them as this aggressive expansionist power, which might have been true in a much earlier period. And it also went out of its way to portray them as a Mesopotamian and specifically an Assyrian power, which is very inaccurate. True, they are a vassal kingdom of Assyria, but culturally they are more Hurrian, and their elite is Indo-Aryan. So, like Indians, they kept at Indian deities, for example, quite akin to what the Vedic Indians had.
I thought I knew a lot, and then I met you. You know so much about the history of this.
Well, I actually, for some reason, I really got interested in the Hurrians because I've always wanted to find, like, who are the people who are important who get erased. And I thought that was the Canaanites. And the Canaanites are important, incredibly important, and they got erased somewhat. But who got erased almost completely? The Hurrians. The Hurrians are like that people that are at the root of so much of what we think about the ancient world. And they basically don't feature into people's understandings of history at all. The Hittites, who are already obscure, are the only place where you kind of like get this idea of Hurrians. And Hurrians are kind of used as interchangeable with Mesopotamian or Hittite, depending on the context. But Hurrians had a unique culture. They were not simply just Mesopotamians who spoke a weird language, or Hittites that spoke a weird language. They were at the root of what we think of as Greek mythology to a large extent. These great myths of battles between heroes and monsters goes back to the Hurrian mythology.
So is that also connected to Haranu?
Haranu.
No, I think it's a reference to Haran.
And of course, I think they really went out of their way to marginalize Elam in this as well. And I think Elam, at this point, should be one of the most significant factions in the game. Because in the late Bronze Age, this was the period where Elam was experiencing some of its greatest power and extent over Mesopotamia and influence. So, in the late Bronze Age, after the Hittites sacked Babylon, took Marduk home, there was a major power vacuum after the 17th century BCE, in which a mountain people called the Kassites, who may have been related to the Elamites or may not have been, ended up entering Babylon and forming the 𝉌Canaanite𓀺Yankees dynasty. And their dynasty is very, very obscure, I think, because it does not fit in with people's stereotypes about Babylonian history. All the Babylonians is Semitic. They speak Akkadian. They have their origins from the Amorites. But the Kassites, these are seen as barbarians. And they are people that are known actually for their horse keeping, not as much as the Mitannians were, but the Kassites were actually excellent with horses and chariotry. So Babylon wasn't actually terribly far from the Hittites or the Egyptians in terms of its military. It was not the military of old kingdom Babylon, nor was the kingdom of Neo-Babylon. It was its own thing, much akin to other powers in the late Bronze Age. The aesthetic that they very clearly went with was the stereotypical Babylonian aesthetic. They simply portray the typical Babylonians without the nuance of the Kassite ruling class and influence on the military and society. And of course, Elam, is marginalized. Elam is this great kingdom that has always been practically like an equal competitor to whatever's going on in Mesopotamia. They're the perpetual rivals of whoever's going on, who's ever powerful in Mesopotamia, because they have a stable kingdom, let's say, with a few cities. And they had an interesting system of government which was matrilineal to a certain extent, because each of the kings was picked from the children of the previous king's sister, which I think is a completely unique form of succession.
What was it? I forgot exactly. Oh, right. So one thing I do find kind of interesting is you can see just even in this map how they were already planning on. How do I change the map?
Expanding it.
Yeah. But anyway, before I forget, so just like, okay, so we're playing as Bay, kind of imagining the typical Canaanite vizier. So what would be the it's here. What would be the best decree to first issue? Should we favor the military? Should we favor I guess like ourselves, or kind of like the leadership, or should we favor the populace?
Oh, without a doubt, if you were the character of Bay, you would favor yourself, because the job of the bureaucrat is to work very hard to serve the interest of the people and the state the absolute least you can get away with, and take about as much for yourself as you can possibly do.
All right, so then Canaanite perseverance it is. Our resourcefulness and survival instinct are often underestimated. We can find the rare treasures where others see only useless refuse. And we triumph in conflicts that are deemed hopeless. When all of civilization burns to ashes, we shall be the ones who will walk upon the smooth, blackened earth.
Oh, that's true, actually. That's exactly what happened after the Bronze Age collapse, because the Canaanites didn't go anywhere. In fact, the Canaanites ended up having a lot of independence and becoming stronger after the Bronze Age collapse. The Canaanite centers that were destroyed during the Bronze Age collapse were the ones that were major centers of either imperial rule from one of the major empires that was exerting control on Canaan, as with the case of Ugarit and Kadesh for the Hittites and Hazor for Egypt. But in the main, the Canaanites managed to essentially escape the worst of it and then actually rebound with independence after the Bronze Age collapse. Because the Bronze Age collapse wasn't actually a collapse of civilization as it's often framed, but rather a weakening of the imperial states and the strengthening of the subordinate states on the periphery that are able to now effectively exert their independence.
So, yeah, well, that you're able to phrase it so much more succinctly than I ever could. But and then, just to kind of continue with this, so with so we have two settlements that we currently control, which is Sidon, or as people might know in English, how's it called in English? Like Sidon?
Biden, I guess.
Yeah, and then you have Tzor, which is Tyre, and both of these are like the two. I'd say like beyond Byblos or Gubal, or also like which is basically very very close to Beirut, but they are different settlements. They share different histories. So those three cities are probably the most prominent in all of Lebanon, right?
Yes, these are the cities that are well attested from a very early period of being coastal trading cities of the Phoenicians, or which is just simply a word for coastal Canaanites. They were very prominent politically and known for their close economic ties with Egypt. So Byblos, of course, being the exemplary version of the loyal Canaanite vassal, the one that had been with the Egyptian Empire even before the late Bronze Age, and even in the earliest, I think, Canaanite king even mentioned in historical records was a king of Byblos who was contemporary to, if I'm not mistaken, Senusret the First in the Middle Kingdom, so like in the 1800s BCE. He's the first king in like Canaan proper to be mentioned by name, and he had himself buried and preserved and mummified in the Egyptian fashion. So the coastal Canaanites were significantly Egyptianized, Egyptian influenced due to trade.
Interesting. So we're going to start off just by recruiting here. Get two slinger units. Then
They look like cavemen.
Yeah, they do. We're starting out with the most shitty units. So here in Sidon, we have an outpost that currently, because for whatever reason, the deity that he's dedicated to is Thoth. Though ultimately, I think we're going to change that. What do you think would be the primary god of like Sidon and Tzor?
Well, the primary god historically of Sidon was Eshmun, the god of healing. And even you go to Sidon today, you can visit the sanctuary of Eshmun in the periphery. And you can also, and when it comes to Tzur, their god, most associated with Tyre from historical sources, was the god Melkart, who was associated with the Greek Hercules. And I actually think it's very likely that Melkart was based on the legends of a hero that may have actually lived during this exact time, during the time of the late Bronze Age collapse.
Interesting. So unfortunately, both of those gods aren't in the game. I think
Yeah.
what we have is we have El, we have Baal, we have Yam, we have Asherah, we have Moloch, which isn't even
Historical.
yeah. I mean, like, I guess you could say, oh, well, maybe you could connect Moloch with Melkart, but that's such a stretch. Really, the closest would be with maybe Milcom, and even then it would be a stretch. But,
I think
so, yeah.
for Tyre, well, certainly we have plenty of examples of Baal worshipping kings of Tyre. Although Baal is very ambiguous. Baal is really a title for different deities. Hadad being the Baal of Ugarit, but the Baal of Tyre is almost certainly simply El. Baal Shemin is essentially just El, which was the chief god of Tyre.
Interesting. So, so when we switch this out, because I think it takes a few turns, you think we should choose L?
I think that we should choose El, yes.
All right.
And-
so, oh yeah. Wait. So that was in Sidon or Tyre? You said.
Let me think. So the king of Tyre, during the late Bronze Age, or the earlier ones, was named Ilimilku, who was a significant king of Tyre. So that shows, without a doubt, that El was worshipped in Tyre. I think that's what you should go with.
All right, and then so for Sidon, because that's associated with Eshmun, I think the counterpart would be maybe the closest would be Astarte Asherah potentially, because kind of like the heavenly matron, or like like the lover of Eshmun is.
Well, I think either Ashtart or even, Moloch might be a stand-in for Reshep.
Oh, I can kind of see that.
Which was a popular deity who is the father of Eshmun.
So, wait, the father of Eshmun is, I thought it was Sedek.
Sedek. Well, I'm aware of there being differing accounts. It's kind of ambiguous.
Is it possible that because there's like different manifestation of Eshmun? One of them is Eshmun Choron, I think.
My understanding is, when I was learning the religion, that Eshmun was one of the sons of Reshep, and he had 7 older sons called, if I'm not mistaken, the Qabirim.
Oh yeah,
Qabirim, and Eshmun is called Eshmun because he's the 8th one.
Yeah. From what I remember, yeah, sorry.
But Siddiq, the thing about deities, it's ambiguous who's related to who. They always say that Baal is Anat's sister, but according to the cosmogony, he's not actually even her sister. It's just very ambiguous because it's hard to tell when they're referring to familial relationships in the context of actual familial relationships, and familial relationships as in brother, father, sister, that are representing relationships of metaphorical relationships, which were very prominent in the Near East. Obviously, Tushratta and Amenhotep III were not brothers, even though, well, they were also brother-in-laws, but they were not factual brothers, but they always refer to themselves as brothers because they have equal status. And you still see this in the Middle East. You go in Morocco, for example, I want to get some man's attention. I say, Khouya, which means brother. And then they come, it's just familial relationships, and the status associated with them is a simplification of a social structure based on hierarchy. You refer to your superior as father, you refer to your inferior as my son, and your equal as a brother or sister. And I think this is one of the things that makes it difficult to interpret Canaanite mythology, because of the ambiguity of what's a familial relationship and what's just metaphorical.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely in transcribing some of the ball cycle, I noticed that, like for instance, was it Anas referred to as well, I mean different contexts, but one of the terms is yabimtu, the in-law. And what's interesting is something I noticed from that is that actually shares the same root with the term yibum, which is the concept of like levirate marriage, where like if a man dies and he has a brother who's unmarried and the wife is left without a husband, according to tradition she's supposed to marry the brother, and that practice is called yibum. And now it makes sense because it literally means in-law.
Yeah, it's interesting which cultures in the Near East practiced levirate marriage and which did not. I was reading a book called Women of Canaan that they argued that in Ugarit that they did not practice levirate marriage, and that made it a more open place and a more or less patriarchal civilization for women than what was typical in the Near East.
Oh, because then they weren't bound to a family. They were like, if their husband died, they kind of could almost choose who they remarried.
Well, it does seem, based on text from Ugarit, that at least elite women had independent power and status and agency in their own business and life. I think you kind of have to have a certain degree of codified independence for women to get misogynistic quotes like we get from Ugarit, like, never tell your wife where you hide the money. There wouldn't be any need for that in a truly patriarchal society, because women wouldn't be allowed to have property in those societies. They wouldn't be able to go to the market and spend their husband's money with impunity in a truly patriarchal society. And I guess you can say that Ugarit was, in many ways, a moral, a progressive society, even by the standards of the Canaanites.
Interesting. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm building a shrine in the outskirts of Tyre. Usually in my other playthroughs, I've actually built either fortresses or towers here, because this is roughly in the territory of Magdala, and Magdala is named after the term for tower.
Oh yeah, so, of course.
Yeah, so it's kind of like
tower.
So I don't know. What I could do. No, what I'll do
just invade someone.
Okay, we'll do that. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to not build that here. Right here, I will build a tower, because that is Magdala. Wait, is this what? Warriors Refuge? Is it? I've not seen this building before. Uh-oh. Please tell me. Yeah, I'm Bay. This has got to be a new building, because last time I played it didn't have it. So we're going to build a Canaanite lookout post here.
So how does the building of buildings influence, the gameplay? Is there one for economy? You build something and your economy gets better. You build one and you can recruit certain kind of troops. You build one and your troops get buffed up, I guess. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so if you build a fort, it actually allows you to garrison your troops there. So you can it also makes the troops that you station there, the cost of their upkeep is 50% less. And so with that, implicitly, because you're not having to feed, all these animals that are, carrying stuff or whatever, because they're just, in one location. It also, let's see, it makes it where first, enemies have to attack this fortress before they can go after any settlement that's in that territory. So I think probably for this Magdala, I mean, I think the lookout post is the most like a tower. Yeah, Canaanite sentries are instructed to occasionally fire arrows at shadows in the vicinity. Who knows which one could start giving birth to yet another foe. So yeah, I think that's probably the most tower-like. So with this Sidon, okay, let's see here. Yeah, we'll keep this fortress here. This is where we will build our shrine, and we'll eventually dedicate it to El once we have the ability to. What else do we have here? Settlement upgrade available. How much does this require to upgrade? Yeah.
How does economies work in this game? Do you have something like a central currency, or do you have to pay things through, quantified versions of different resources?
So, for the most part, yeah, I think every territory has a resource. So, for instance, both Sur and Sidon, because they're fishing villages, and because they have access to rivers nearby, they're or fresh, sources of fresh water as well as the sea. They're primarily and by primary, I think you can build other resources, but for the most part, by default, it's going to give you the option to so here you can see we have a fishing grounds in Sur, we have a royal fishery in Sidon, and then we have a smuggler's bay. They will deliver anything anywhere to anyone. They deal in complete secrecy or else in utter and utterly false candor. Whatever works. So with this, I guess you're bringing in food from other places as well. Maybe smuggling wine and shit. I don't know.
What would they be smuggling? It's not like there was much control over the economy in the ancient Near East. The control over the economy was essentially just extortion and corruption and robbery.
All right, so that's probably what it is then. So with that, so then if you look over here, so Gebal has the same resources. Go down further to Yapo, same resource, because you have basically if you go along the coast, it's all going to be food because they all have access to the sea, which was one of the most abundant sources of food in the ancient world, even today. And so then what's interesting is I don't know why Urushalim has their resources food because it really doesn't have, I don't know. Then you can see Shechem has marble. Chatzor has marble.
That's
is that marble?
Very weird.
Or sorry, not marble, stone. Sorry, I just in my mind it codes as marble for whatever reason.
So there is a lot of stone in Shechem. Having been there, there's just a lot of rocks lying around, and it's good quality stone. I don't think stone would have been a particularly valuable trade resource in the ancient Near East. There's no real mention of just conventional stones being traded. Wood,
what about
on the other hand,
stones?
Very heavily. We're talking about the economies of how these states worked in the ancient Near East. They were centralized around a palace economy. So the regional ruler or the great ruler, he had his own court and his own palace, which was also the center of economic activity in the state because the ruler of the state was also the largest economic player in the state. He had all sorts of craftspeople. He would often have enormous flocks of livestock that had to be cared for by servants. Every sort of resource could be sort of used and processed in the centralized palace complex. There was independent, industry and independent trade going on, of course, but the palace was kind of like the center of economies at this point.
So that's actually really interesting because I think what you said that made me think. Well, maybe the food in Jerusalem is a reference to the shepherds and the sheep.
Or
you know,
maybe
all
the
these different.
olives.
Yeah. Maybe the what?
Maybe the olives.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Good point. So, and then you can see over here in Pell. I don't even know what Pell is, but
Pella is in just across the Jordan.
so yeah, they have wood as a resource. Then Hathor, which is in the Sinai, they have gold. Timnah has bronze, which it's kind of weird because given that bronze is, I'm surprised they don't have it as copper, and then have it be where in copper settlements you can build places that'll turn into bronze or whatever. But so anyway, so now to actually start to get into the battle because we're about to fight somebody. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, were you going to say something?
I was going to talk about how resources were allocated, because obviously the state was also a producer of resources as well. There were, I told you earlier that there were many soldiers that were self-equipped, but this was generally the elites. They also had state-equipped soldiers who were given weapons and armament from the state itself. They had levies of the state, like citizen levies, and they were armed at the expense of the state. And one of the biggest expenses, of course, was bronze. Bronze being something that both of its elements had to be imported. The copper had to be imported from Cyprus or from Timnah or from any such location, and the tin in bronze is even more difficult to come by, which is, I think, it's ironic for a lot of people because we assume that tin is really common because of the idea of the tin can, but tin is actually quite rare and very localized where it can be discovered. And other than bronze being like inferior in terms of the quality of tools it makes to iron, it's not. It's actually superior, which is why it kept being used far into the Iron Age. It's more that its economic availability or the difficulty obtaining the materials for bronze made it economically inferior to the physically inferior iron. This is, of course, until they develop carbonization processes that make iron that is stronger than bronze. And at that point, bronze is marginalized from military use, apart from decoration.
Wait, iron used in decoration?
No, bronze was used in decoration too.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like Middle Ages.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's much more beautiful iron.
So, also, one thing I do really appreciate about the map of Gebal is that you can literally see, here, let me see if there's here you can see the Gimel, you can see the Bet, and you can see the Lamed. So it's literally just the name. I mean, it's interesting, but it's also not that clever.
Where is it?
Here, if you look here.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. So Gebal, they only have 6 troops, well, six units.
Well, invade
whereas
them.
we have, well, but see, here's the thing. We should probably wait. Also, I think they only have one. They only have that one. So I think what we'll probably do is we're going to raise up another unit so that we're ready to take Gebal once it falls to the is that the Teresh? Oh, I'm right. I remember. Okay, so we're going to raise up here a general, and we have Adonibal, and he'll allow us to move the fastest, which I think is probably going to be worthwhile, especially if we want to get places in time. Then there's also Zimrida, and then there's Tani.
Zimrida. My name is Joshua.
I don't get the joke.
Oh, I'm just not used to seeing it read as Zimrida. I always see it as Zimreda.
Oh. All right. Let's see. So, and then, okay, so we have this guy recruiting 2. Are we able to recruit any now? No. It's going to take another turn. So we're just going to have this guy stationed here in Sidon. It's also going to help with the population. Not make sure they don't get any ideas. Bay's recruiting. So I guess it's time to enter, and then we'll see what happens.
Invade Czechoslovakia.
I don't think they've added that yet.
Okay,
so we've got the Teresh. Teresh are sailing south to Gabul. They're not sailing. No, they're shit. They're sailing further south. Not good. This is not good.
Fight
This
them.
is not good. What?
Fight them. Don't be a bitch. Be a mensch.
We've only got one issue, though.
They'll win.
Wait, what? Did they just... Those people retreat? What on earth? Okay, so that's retreating. We can ambush the other group. Hanno's marching away. Maybe they're going to Damascus. We are marching to Damascus, and our name is Paul. No, so let's let them do that. We're going to go south. We're going to waffle stomp these Teresh with the help of our mighty general Adonibal. So let's see. We can get there. So I'm going to move this guy out. Oh, and this guy, he's in a war march. So this guy, he's about to get ambushed. So
ambushing was a very common tactic used in the ancient Near East to buy the Canaanites. It was often one of the chief methods of warfare. There are not really many mentions of these like picked field battles because, I guess the Canaanites understood that because they were kind of weaker than their neighbors, they can never fight like symmetric warfare. They'll just lose. So they would use any kind of strategy that can kind of like enhance their success, even with smaller numbers. And that's why warfare was based on ambushes and sieges and attrition, raids. But it's just not. I think in the perspective of a total war style game, that sort of thing just wouldn't be interesting. But it might be more interesting in like a Mountain Blade or even a first person style game.
Wait, so you said one wouldn't be as interesting to depict?
A game about attrition and raids and ambushes. And
I mean,
use of landscape.
It is depicted pretty well, I'd say, as best as you can with something that's kind of top down like this.
I think it's a little.
So
I find it quite macro in its look at a warfare, which is understandable when you have like these vast campaign maps. But if they wanted to do a small campaign map focused just on Anatolia, Canaan, and Egypt, they should have done it a lot more detailed.
Oh, I 100% agree. I wish that you would have. Oh my god! Imagine a full map, like if they would have done a fully detailed map of just the Levant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't have been what they would have done for this time period. I feel like they were confused about what they actually wanted out of it, because on one hand, they wanted to do an Egyptian civil war, fighting between different Egyptian factions to become the pharaoh, kind of like their three kingdoms where the different factions are fighting to become the emperor of China. But at the same time, they also wanted to have this, gratify people's desires to see other parts of the Near East. They wanted to gratify. Well, where are the Hittites? But the Hittites aren't really relevant to this particular power struggle in Egypt. If they wanted to do this, I think they should have, started the campaign more like in the 1400s BC rather than 1100s.
Or the Battle of Kadesh.
No, but long before the Battle of Kadesh, around the time of the Battle of Megiddo, or even before that. I think when I would have started the campaign, perhaps, or if I wouldn't do multiple campaigns, would be around the same time as Egypt is really just pushing into the Levant. Probably not the time of Ahmose, but not long after it. Maybe like Amenhotep I would be a good time.
That does sound interesting.
Although Ahmose I would be a very interesting campaign as well. But you could start even before him. You could start with Egyptians pushing out the Hyksos, since we actually have really good examples of military strategy and combined arms, use of naval and land power in military strategy. And then you could have a strategy game where you fight battles in Egypt. Play as the Egyptians, fight battles in Egypt, because I feel like they were really desperate to show off Egypt in battle maps. And at the height of the Egyptian Empire, there wouldn't have been battles in Egypt. There would have only been battles in, like, the Levant and Nubia.
Interesting. So another thing that would be a potentially interesting game would be a game that's basically about being a Phoenician trader, and you're going around and, trading.
That's a good game. I feel like there's not enough games where you just explore an interesting location and kind of like fit into that setting. Fit into the setting rather than be the most important person in the setting.
Let's see. Okay, so this should work. Please let it not be too far. Okay, this is just perfect. So this allows us to... Wait, what? When you're in view of another faction's army... Oh, that's some fucking bullshit. Okay, I guess in that case, we're just going to... Okay, we could attack him straight on, and then this guy... Wait, do we have any... Yeah, we're not able to recruit mercenaries yet, and we don't even need it. So he's in marching stance, so we can really take him easy. So here, control save. Shit. It's now just occurring. Well, no, because he could go south to Tyre, but he might not declare. So we need to declare war preemptively. So we're not. This isn't a proper ambush, but it's the closest we're going to get to it. We're declaring war. I'm going to save before, just in case. And actually, let me see if there's anything I can do before this. Construction outpost. So Sidon. So this is what can we build here? Should we build something that gives us a little bit more resources and increases the how much we can? We'll refund. Yeah, it refunds movement. Actually, that sounds pretty good. The other option would be to refund the movement, and that going south. Let's just do something that gives us an economic boost.
I was just thinking about something with these Total War games and the way that Total War games teach you to think about history. That it's kind of like a very harmful attitude to take.
In what way? I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just wondering how you mean.
Total War and other such strategy games are really map games. And they teach you to think about history as the transference and conquest of different sections of the map by different institutions, one after the other, rather than thinking about the basis of human history being humans, rather than this city and this geographical region.
Interesting.
and the
Yeah,
empires that rule it.
I definitely see where you're coming from. It's like it's reductive.
And it's reductive, and it's a way that it's influentially reductive because this influences the way people think about history and politics. We try to view things from like the empire or the state model rather than looking at what is actually going on. There's people, there are families, there are tribal entities, planet like moieties going on, each sort of, and they're not tied always to a specific location. And in some cases that, and it tends to focus more on cities. Like what's outside of the city is just rendered kind of just as nature with trees and deserts. While most of this area would have been under farm, it would have been under the hoe, because they wouldn't have abided, the idea that it should be returned to nature, returned to the desert. That is symbolic of failure, essentially. Failure and defeat is when your lands are returned to a state of nature. Your fields are not tilled. This is the ultimate kind of like curse that they mention in all sorts of Near Eastern literature and in even just like regular political and diplomatic correspondence. The king of Megiddo says his fields are not tilled, his sheep are not shorn, as a demonstration of his military setbacks.
Here, yeah, you can keep going for a bit because it's still loading the
Okay.
battle.
It's interesting, like how warfare is so much connected to economics and to obviously the movements of people. People, like livestock, were economic commodities in the ancient world, whether they were officially owned by another individual or not. Obviously, there was a large amount of slavery going on in the ancient world, despite what Egypt buffs will tell you. Egypt did have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of slaves in it that were, conquered peoples, Canaanites taken through its various, wars of, expansion, punitive wars against rebellions, that the slave population in any region of Egypt would have been significant, particularly centered around temples, who would be donated large quantities of slaves to do skilled labor, but also to be unskilled farmers, which was the primary, exercise of slaves in Egypt, was simply to be agricultural laborers for landlords or for the temple estates and royal estates that had to be worked, because the source of income for the state was the personal land holdings of the pharaoh himself. The pharaoh himself was not just the ruler, but he was the most powerful individual economic holder.
Interesting. So, in some ways, it's almost like, oh dang it, where was I going with that? What was it you literally just said? Sorry, I lost the train of thought.
We have this modern idea that there's a separation between the wealth of the state and the wealth of the ruler individually. But this is a very modern concept. The wealth of the ruler is the wealth that goes into the state, and the wealth of the state goes into the coffers of the ruler individually and to his inner cadre of elites. And we are sort of shocked to find out that that is still what's going on.
Oh, I got it. So do you think that might be the context in which the narrative of being cursed to till the earth, like for food, comes from?
Yeah, so there was a big dialectical divide between sedentary peoples who had more stability but less freedom and much more labor, and migratory people who had less consistent lifestyles but much more freedom and much more ease.
Interesting. It's such a fascinating topic, and it's like it's just it boggles my mind that there's people who literally think that they're cursed to till the earth in order to get food, when it's like there's plenty of food that you don't need to do that in order to get it.
Well, there was this idea of like nomadism where you are keeping animals, and there were also different political structures. When we say like judges in the Bible, we really mean kind of like tribal sheikhs, essentially. They're people who adjudicate cases, but they are not so much people who order folks around like a king. They are invested with power rather than assuming power.
That's a interesting. Like literally, the power is vested into them rather than being something that they possess innately.
That's the difference between Irsu and Bay. Bay is a Canaanite king, whereas Irsu is really much more of a Canaanite judge. He's ruling a tribal entity, kind of like the kingdom of Amuru. But there are also lots of cases which blur the line between kingship and judgeship, like Labayu of Shechem, who is the official king of Shechem, but is also the judge who's over these groups of Habiru.
All right. So, one thing that we can potentially do. So, sorry, just ate a cookie and I need to clear my mouth. So, current weather is dry. We could wait for the battle to start and potentially get a thunderstorm. Now, as Canaanites, we're used to this. But our foes, who are Teresh, they're part of the sea peoples, they're not so used to fighting in the middle of a thunderstorm. At least not here. They don't know this territory. So we could wait, or there's always a chance that could change over, but I think we'll wait. We'll see if we can get a thunderstorm. Perfect. Well, it's just a rain. We could wait again and then potentially get a thunderstorm. You think we should wait? You think we should get thunderstorm?
Where do they depict the Teresh as being from originally?
I'm not actually sure. Okay, let's wait. Ah, dang it. No weather changes. Okay, we just got stupid dry weather. Whatever. I'm not going to waste time in reloading it. So, what we're dealing with here. Okay, so I guess our reinforcements are going to come from there. So, what I might do is I'm going to split this up. So we're going to put one group here, one group here. I'm going to put one group here. I'm going to put one group here. I'm going to put one group here, and then one here, and then one here, and then one. Actually, no, these guys are advanced scouts, so we can actually put them over here. Oh, I forgot about that. They have more troops than I can see immediately, so I'm actually going to keep them back there because I don't want them to get off too quickly.
Just attack directly. Charge at him. Show them your spears.
Okay. melee front. Here we go. And then this group over here.
Now let's all line up and stand so we can fight each other. Let's all line up in neat rows so the enemy can shoot us more easily.
Wait, Rose? I hardly knew her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so... Wait, what? How is this? Oh, I forgot about the garrison.
Okay, so you have more.
Yeah, I do.
And they don't let you. In the earlier Total Wars, you couldn't control your reinforcements, which was hugely annoying because the AI was always so bad at using them.
Let's see, so I can do this. And then we will have this group go out to meet them melee front, like this.
So here's a question. At about what casualty level does troops typically flee? An army typically take before it flees from the battle?
I honestly wouldn't know how to quantify that if I'm being honest.
Because I remember playing those old Total War games, you could basically just whittle down your troops to almost nothing in a lot of cases, and your troops would still keep on fighting, which would never happen in antiquity. Once you took even probably like 10% casualties, people would want to disengage from the fighting.
Honestly, I think they might have made it a bit more realistic then, but I'm not sure. Okay, so actually, you know what? We're going to have you guys stop because you're in cover. So that's going to be smart. We're going to keep you guys protected. Wait. Yeah, okay, they're still. Let's see, I guess we'll just have you guys go here.
Of course, like, the game presupposes the purpose of warfare to be warfare itself, to be fighting each other and to be killing the enemy and taking their territory. But the reality of warfare is it's an economic process. If it costs you more to win the war than you get by winning the war, then you don't fight the war.
Alright, so...
And no one really wants to throw themselves at an enemy wholesale unless the situation is absolutely desperate. And in most cases, the use of armies was as just that, as force, you know? It was to force an opponent to conform to your will. And usually it was clear who was stronger, and the stronger one sort of sent the weaker one home and just got what it wanted without the need for too much, fighting. The army was more for coercion than it was for battling with each other. Parity was kind of required for these big battles, which is why there were so few really big battles in the Near East.
Really? I thought it... Oh, but there were a lot of battles, just not a lot of big ones.
There were a lot of conflicts, not necessarily between big powers, because obviously the Hittites fought the Egyptians for a long time, and the Hittites also fought the Assyrians fought the Babylonians, but typically these wars were showing off who was the strongest, who was weaker, and the stronger one imposed their will on the weaker one. And that was also the case in smaller power politics on the more micro level, because there were all these littler conflicts between vassals of different kingdoms, and within the kingdom and between across the border being one of the major ones. Even before the Egyptians and the Hittites would be fighting, the Egyptian vassals would be fighting Hittite vassals. Mitanni vassals would be fighting Hittite vassals.
So yeah, I think we definitely flanked them for sure.
I'm also kind of not really sure why they went with putting the Mitanni in the category of the Hittites. I mean, the way they didn't do that, they probably should have done that instead of putting them in the category of Mesopotamians, because they were much closer to the Hittites than they were to Mesopotamians.
Interesting. Well, I always kind of thought of them as almost like a blend between the two.
Well, certainly, geographically, they were located between the two. The majority culture in the kingdom of Mitanni was Hurrian, which was also the case for a lot of the Hittite Empire. The west was mostly Luwian, the east was mostly Hurrian. And there were also significant regions in the Mitanni Empire that were culturally northwest Semitic or Canaanite, or East Semitic, Akkadian. But the dominant culture was of course, Hurrian. But they always marginalized the Hurrians. The Hurrians are never really given any proper show in these sort of projects that deal with the Near East because the Hurrians don't have a recognizable aesthetic. The same way even the Babylonians or certainly the Egyptians, or even as much as like the little that the Hittites have, the aesthetic of the Hurrians is simply not a prestigious or a well-known aesthetic. Like people, you can easily imagine in your head what is the stereotypical Babylonian with those horned helmets, the horned caps and the drapes. You can imagine the Egyptian with the Egyptian get up with the pectoral, with these different crowns that the Egyptians had, the gold and the white and the bright, colors, the bold primary colors of Egypt. And perhaps you can imagine the Hittites with the long hair and a kind of rough Anatolian sort of gruff look. But even I have a hard time picturing what is really a Hurrian. What is the Hurrian aesthetic? Because it's something very vague and kind of like ambiguous, even if you look at Hurrian art. It's kind of between everything, but it's also influencing everything.
Let's see how laggy it gets when we zoom in. So you can see the general. Yeah, I can see the gen. Wait. Oh, wait. Where is the gen? I guess I'm just assuming it's this bright guy, maybe. So yeah, I don't even need to look now. They're just completely losing.
It's getting really late. Almost 1:30.
Oof. Yeah. Sorry, I probably, like in hindsight, I probably should have used a game that already had a bit of progress. That way I could have shown more mechanics. But either way, I feel like we still got a lot of good content from this.
I think if they were to do a game, I would suggest that they focus more on the diplomatic relationships between the different states through marriage. The marriage mechanic, I think, was a very good addition because that was the way that power politics was played. Egypt prided itself on never sending its daughters to marry any foreign king until they broke their own rule. And just as they broke their own rule, that's when their power started slipping.
Interesting. And that's also a tradition that you get a similar tradition that emerges in the Israelite tradition, probably something that might have been borrowed over from Egypt, as like you're talking about with the Delta Canaanite influence.
Well, Egypt is very influential on the Israelite religion in particular.
Yeah.
And we're not really sure what the Israelite religion truly came from. I think it's also important to make a distinction between the Judahite and Israelite religion. Despite the fact that the Judahites and not the Israelites are the ancestors of the Jews, we know so little actually about the Judahites and their origins compared to the Israelites, who actually bear very little relation with the Jews.
I do think it's worth mentioning, though, that while the Kingdom of Israel ceased to exist past a certain point, a good amount of the refugees from there ended up fleeing south.
Yes,
This
is the truth. And the Bible we have today is the harmonization of these two accounts, these two traditions.
Yeah, it's something that I think, like, the truth is a lot more interesting than what the narrative portrays. In all honesty,
I'm actually really curious about, apart from what the Bible says, what is the real kingdom of Judah? Because it seems like this is a very despite what you would think, it's really hard to say what is the real origin of the kingdom of Judah when you peel back the mythology, because it's a historical kingdom. It existed unambiguously. But where did it come from when you peel back the level of mythology from it? No one knows. Really.
yeah. I mean, one of the theories that some people have put forward, which I'll be honest, like, it's interesting, but I don't know how much truth there is to it. That connects it actually to potentially one of the sea peoples.
Yes, I was actually thinking of the same thing. As soon as I start talking about that, I think that is actually very, very plausible, and that is perhaps something that may make it permanently mysterious, because the sea peoples are very poorly understood. Apart from the Sheridans, who are actually quite well understood. We know where they're from. We know a lot about their culture from archaeology. But the other
And
sea peoples, much less. Oh, and the Luca. We know a lot about the Luca.
also
They're
the other, yeah.
European.
The other thing that I did want to mention, though, because it did tie into the thing that you want to talk about, we could always do this another time, but kind of talking a bit more about the connection between the Amazigh and, like, the tradition. Like, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but at least the tradition does definitely exist of, like, the connection with Canaan.
Well, Amazigh, there's a lot of connections to all the major traditions of the ancient Mediterranean, with Egypt, with Canaan, and with the Greek tradition. I've heard that it's been said that the Greek myths are just politicized, simplified retellings of Amazigh myth. And that actually the term Amazon actually comes from Amazigh. I've even heard that before, because they had matriarchal societies in the old Amazigh, and many of them actually survive even till today. There is, I can't remember what's the city in Algeria that actually still has a matriarchal society. The women live in the city, and their husbands live in the countryside.
Wow. That actually is very reminiscent of the whole, like, the narrative of, like, the death and rebirth of Baal. Like that, the Baal resurrects in the countryside and comes to meet his bride.
And the other thing about it is the Amazigh have an ancient tradition of gay marriage that goes back to remote antiquity and persisted until the 19th century in Siwa Oasis.
Wow, really?
Yep. So they have the custom that a man can marry up to 4 wives, and there's a reasonable dowry payment, but a man could only marry one other man, and this was seen as the more higher form of romance of the Siwa Amazigh. But this cultural element was marginalized with the standardization of Islam in Egypt in the 19th century, with the development of Al Azhar as an institution of formalizing what it means to be Muslim in a modern context. And neither the Muslim authorities nor the Western colonial authorities had much patience for this Amazigh tradition. And it essentially was all but erased. And even the local people sometimes are in denial about whether it was practiced. But but the sources are very clear that this was something that was practiced in Siwa from remote antiquity.
It definitely sounds like, even if that's maybe not its origins, it sounds like it has connections to a lot of like Greek traditions.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Greeks had this tradition of belovers and beloved, and there's also examples of same-sex marriages in ancient Egypt as well. I was thinking about talking much more about these very, very unique nuggets of information we have about ancient Amazigh culture. And it kind of like, I'm sure is only the tip of the iceberg of what was there. I actually had the idea of making like this fun novel because I want to make money and make a living on writing, called The Rise and Fall of the Empire of Atlantis. And it's a fictional story, but because there's no evidence for Atlantis really existing. But if it did exist, it would be in North Africa for sure.
Are you going to mention the recap structure?
The what?
The Eye of the Sahara.
Yeah, well, so it's not so much about like the modern sort of conspiracy theory elements of it, but rather a world building structure of creating an Amazigh or even like proto-Afro-Asiatic society using various elements that we know about Amazigh, Hausa, Fula, and other Afro-Asiatic cultures in North Africa in a green Sahara, and an empire of that achieves high levels of complexity in essentially the Pleistocene, but it gets wiped out due to climate change. That's the idea of the novel. It would be a fantasy, only it's just kind of like boringly mundane about the conflict. Of course, it's not boring. It wouldn't be boring at all. It would be filled with all sorts of interesting things, but nothing would be fantastical. Everything would be kind of just mundane and realistic, but interesting in the way that it's mundane and realistic.
Mundane and realistic, like that guy just getting beheaded?
Some guy just got beheaded?
Yeah.
Oh, well, good for him.
But yeah, even if it's like, very mundane, but not that mundane isn't interesting. But even if it is mundane, you definitely can still incorporate, that whole like motif of the recap structure because of like the circular nature of it, kind of this idea of a the society that revolves around this central point, whatever that central point is, whether like in this physical sense or metaphorical sense.
Well, I think it's an interesting idea. Is like, what about a technologically advanced society that underwent a completely different path to its technological advancement and thus has a very different material culture than our own, but is at roughly the same level of advancement? I thought that's a fun idea, but it's also foundationally based on science and not like magic or some shit.
Yeah, or like
so
you can't
advance us in some elements, but less advanced in others.
Yeah,
that's one thing.
I don't think there's anything wrong with magic. It's just, what type of magic? Is it high magic? Is it low magic? Is it ceremonial magic? Ritual magic?
For me, I'm more interested in social magic. How does society evolve to cope with different challenges? Or how does it not evolve to cope with different challenges? How does it get fixated onto this sort of tail that wags the dog, and becomes unable to cope with it the challenges of its environment, but it finds it impossible to change the problems of its society because it loves the problems of its society, which of course is pretty much the reason for the collapse of these empires during the late Bronze Age.
It's almost
They
like the
they couldn't give up on the corruption that made them so powerful and so wealthy, or the institutions that made them so powerful and so wealthy ended up becoming so corrupt, and there was nothing, that they could do socially to adapt to the changing circumstance besides contract.
What you were saying, it almost reminds me of this idea. It's like being enslaved to freedom, or like it's a paradox in some ways that that the very thing which propagates it is the very thing it's trying to fight.
Exactly. I mean, like, if you want to have this laissez-faire system, complete competition, part of competing is limiting your ability of your competition to compete by whatever means necessary. First thing they teach you in business class is throw morality in the garbage, screw over the sweet little old lady selling cookies, use whatever advantage you have and crush your competition. It's a completely amoral system of arrangement, and I think that's ultimately why the ideal of a free market can't work, because it destroys itself. And what you have is, it just leads to a sort of feudalism eventually, which is what we have now. We are living in a post-capitalist society, which is just digital feudalism. Even the capital.
Sorry. I was just going to say, we all live in a post-capitalist society.
Yeah, because in the end, these great corporations that used to be, independent are now feudal entities under bigger corporations that own the space that they exist on, like Amazon.
Yeah, it's like you have the king, and then you have the king of kings.
Yes.
Or rather, the king and the king of kings.
So the king would be like, that company that manufactures the cheap Chinese shit that you buy. And then the king of kings would be Jeff Bezos.
That's pretty well put. But yeah, we should probably finish up. I did just want to read these comments real quick. Aren't the Mitanni later descendants of the Hurrians?
The Mitanni elites were principally Indo-Aryan, but they adopted many aspects of Hurrian culture. Were they Hurrian or not? It's ambiguous. I guess identity is very ambiguous in the Near East. They continuously used Sanskrit names for their royal lineages. But the majority population was Hurrian, and the royal cult harmonized Indo-Aryan and Hurrian influences.
Interesting.
It's an ambiguous area of study. Archaeology on the Mitanni civilization is kind of still in its infancy. We only recently discovered some major sites that really shed a light on it, and many of the ones that we have are really incidental. Ugarit was previously a vassal of Mitanni, and it mentions that, but it's not very detailed. The Nuzi archives are very, let's say, they mention Mitanni because they're a subordinate to a subordinate of Mitanni, and they don't necessarily tell us what the main Mitanni center was like. It's rather what the Mesopotamian periphery of Mitanni was like. Mitanni appears to have been like more of a feudal state than an imperial state, even more so than other powers of the time. Yeah, the Orontes River were very significant, although Yamhad is actually not on the Orontes. That's north of the Orontes, but
Let's see, where's Yamhad?
Yamhad, and all these Aranti civilizations like Qatna, Kadesh, Tunip, Nia, all of these sort of city-states are deeply, deeply underrated and deserve much more research and study. And one of the main subjects of the nonfiction book that I've kind of had on my back burner for the past year, the contemporaries of the pharaoh and their histories.
Interesting. Where is Yamhad not on this map?
No, Yamhad's up north. Yeah. See, Halab, that's Yamhad.
Oh, wait, it's the same place?
Yamhad is just the kingdom that was ruled from Aleppo.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I knew that Halab and Aleppo are the same thing. Like, for instance, like if you ever meet a Jew named like Halabi, their family's from Aleppo, and it's going. I mean, it's going the same if you're even if you're not Jewish.
Mm-hmm. Halab or Aleppo was one of the prime, even by the late Bronze Age when the political power was crushed. It was still one of the biggest cult centers in the Near East for the worship of Hadad, who was still who would become increasingly the most important deity of that time, both in Mesopotamia and in Syria and in South Canaan, and increasingly so even in Anatolia and in Egypt, although sometimes under different names. Kind of like how Jesus becomes Korean if you give him to Korea. Ħadad is kind of like the original universal deity.
Yeah. So, sometime what I do. Oh wait, what just happened? Sometime I do plan on because I've been working with an AI program to turn and it's actually because Killetz actually told me about this program. Thank you for that. But I've been transcribing from an LDS source. It's a pretty good transliteration of the Ugaritic, but I've been using that as kind of a way of, learning backwards Ugaritic, given like there's a lot of really similar roots. Like for instance, the word in Ugaritic for table is tulchan, whereas in Hebrew it's shulchan. And like you can really see these connections. Or for instance, you have atirat becomes ashirat, and or like atirat becomes ashirat, and just a lot of fascinating stuff there. So I'm probably going to work on doing that. Oh right, I was trying to find the video that you linked, or that not video, but the song that you linked. Yeah.
So this is my Egyptian diss song. I actually wrote this inspired by Near Eastern curses, and so the execration tablets from the Middle Kingdom Egypt and Baal epics. Sort of the way that it's worded is authentically Near Eastern, and the idea is it's a Egyptian diss song where they're dissing all of their traditional enemies, the Nubians and the Asiatics. So if you get a chance to play it.
All right. Let's see. How do I do this? Oh yeah, I think here. Where was it? Here. Hold on, it froze for a second. Wait. Your username is explosives hoe gaze, or is it explosive shoe gaze?
I guess. I don't know. I didn't create that username. I was shocked as you to find out that was my username.
Okay, what on earth is going on with this? It is like frozen. One moment.
I guess it was a buggy mess when it was released. I think there needs to be a competitor for Total War that does basically the same thing that it does, but better, so that it kind of has a kick in the pants to do what it does better.
Have you ever played Crusader Kings?
I haven't played Crusader, but it doesn't have the same format as Total War. And I know that it's more like a map game, but I like being able to interact with the world on a more micro level with the battles as well, which is what I think is missing from Crusader Kings. I would love to see Crusader Kings, but with Total War style battles.
There's actually a mod that basically hold on. Okay. But I was going to say that there's actually a mod that ends up like retrofitting Mountain Blade Warband or Banner Lord.
Yeah.
So that whenever you do a battle or like you, I forget exactly how it is, or it might be for Total War, but I think there's also one for Crusader Kings that lets you like take over territory and do shit like that. So I might be wrong. All right. Here, I'm going to start this one over. I don't know why it's so buggy all of a sudden.
Maybe because there's a whole video game running, hogging all the data, like a Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah, that could definitely be it. Oh, what did I just do?
Braves of the two lands, say braves of the two lands, speak, for you have a message to declare. Say to the wild Asiatics, say to the children of Seth, the children of Sekhmet, rage flame burns in their car. We will not eat Ekis grant, we will not drink filthy water, we will eat good bread of Kemet. We will drink good beer from barley, like the barley thou wilt be known, like the grain you will be treasured, like the chaff you will be tossed to the wind, like a corn you will be ground in the millstone, like seeds you will be planted in the fields, like the fruit of the vine you will be pressed. Say to the wild goose, yes, say to the children of the poor, to you we will not bow, like the bone you will be strung, like the shaft you will be festooned with feathers, like the beast in the field you will be overcome, like the bird of the air you will be merciless with arrows, like the wild bull you will be fought for poachers. Say to the nine bulls, say to the pharaoh's enemies, you will be like scorpions beneath the sandalfoot, like a serpent in the mouth of an ibis. Prayer will deliver you into my hands like a barley loaf. I will break you like a cake of emmer. I will devour you.
So I'm curious, what is there a reason that like you spelled it out in a way to have it like pronounce it a certain way?
Well, I kind of, first of all, I wanted it to kind of have be mispronounced in a kind of a Middle Eastern kind of way. Didn't really work out how I wanted. Also, certain words you kind of have to misspell because they will be content flagged by the program. Like Asiatics. For some reason, they didn't like the term Asiatics much.
Something that you could use is use diacritics. That way it forces the pronunciation.
True. This is kind of an earlier experiment, but I liked the way it turned out. I liked the melody, and it feels very inspiring in a racist kind of way.
Yeah,
like all of the military songs are.
Yeah, they definitely. Honestly, like on one hand, I haven't like not saying this isn't what you're doing. It's also not what I'm doing, but I have an issue with people who like they'll try to pass off an AI song as something they made. It's like you could say you made the lyrics, you could say, but like. But what I find interesting is I do think that there is something special about it. Again, there's a lot of them that are just shit because it's like it's it's not training it off of what sounds good to a human ear. It's basically just an algorithm. Mm-hmm. But then nonetheless, because there is that level of randomness to it, I do feel like there is kind of this level of like almost like 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 it's not supernatural, but like it's beyond mundane in a way.
Well, the creative element of creating music is kind of misunderstood by the general public. I guess no, people don't really sit down and they think about every note and they think about how every lyric interacts with every note. Great songs are written kind of off the top of, great songwriters' head. And it's based on their knowledge, imprinted knowledge of like years and years of musical conventions and listening to different artists, getting inspired by different artists. And essentially, you could say that the AI is kind of doing the same thing. And you're kind of using a creative process saying which AI song you're going to say is going to represent your vision for this particular musical idea. But I also see the perspective that it is non-consensually violating the copyright of so many different artists. I've had songs come out that sound absolutely indistinguishable in terms of vocal quality and musical arrangement from Pharaoh's, for example. And I'm sure if you use more genres that are more popular, it's very easy to recognize, oh, this one's Taylor Swift that they're ripping off. This one's Ariana Grande, or this one's Billie Eilish.
Well, but the interesting thing about that, though, is that doesn't actually discount it. The issue is when it, like I think it's all contextual. So, for instance, if someone were to do that very same thing, but they did it instead of an AI, it would be the same issue. It's ultimately like just because you write a song and you record it doesn't mean that you're going to go and publish it or make money off of it. And I think it should be viewed the same way with AI, like and potentially even create tools that are able to, try and detect which, like basically what's based off, like to be able to almost think of it like a DNA test, but for influence, and that could potentially even be used for human created music in order to see how the two pair off.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, human created music is, in a certain extent, created the same way by training yourself with thousands of examples of other artists' music, the same way the AI is trained. So that's what creates the ambiguity. You can make a case either way, and of course, we are living in a world where laws are simply not made, and the institutions of power, the official institutions that should be making laws, are simply not competent to handle modern questions. They are more, the only kind of laws that get passed now are the laws that give themselves pay increases in Congress, essentially.
In some ways, you could almost think of the legal system as the new type of religion.
Yeah. The legal system is essentially making the law for itself. The judicial system is making the law for itself because the law, it cannot keep up with changes in society. So things always go to court now to decide rather than to a legislature.
Yeah. It just reminds me of what I was talking about with one of my professors recently about, I was telling him about some crazy shit on the internet, and he was telling me, I think the internet might have been a mistake. I'm like, it's sort of Damocles. It cuts both ways.
The reality is that we're kind of living in a world of judge rule, because the discretion is going to unelected judges who are meant to interpret laws, but the laws are so vague and unrelated to the questions that they're dealing with that they're essentially making law themselves. And then this is the only institution of power, and it's just kind of like you have the Canaanite judges, that they aren't necessarily ordering that a certain thing be done, but they're interpreting the law of, like, the unwritten law of the people, that a certain thing should be done in a certain case. It's a heuristic rather than the arbitrary command of a king.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, we could talk about this forever. I'm sorry. you
Modern
probably need
politics is ancient Canaan.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this whole thing is so fascinating. There's so much we could discuss, like literally until the end of time. Well, except for the fact that we won't be there until the end of time. But for the sake of the turn of phrase, it works.
Well, for the sake of I need to sleep, I probably need to sleep. It's almost 2 a.m.
Yikes! Yeah. I'll let you get to that. Say hi to. I don't know what I was going to say, like say hi to the gods in your dreams for me, but I don't know. That sounds really stupid now that I say that.
That's not bad. I should say hi to the cute cats in Morocco tomorrow.
Oh,
That's
cool.
cute. There's so many cats here.
Have you gone to the Blue City?
Yeah, what is it? And that's what 𝉌Canaanite𓀺Yankees. Yeah, I went there the day after I come into Morocco from Spain. I go to 𝉌Canaanite�ฒ�Yankees. There are videos on my channel about it. You can see it. Eventually, I'm going to make a video about the pirate queen of 𝉌Canaanite�ฒ��Yankees.
Wait, was she Jewish?
No, she was Muslim, but I think her family. Yeah, no, she was Muslim for sure, but I think the extent to which 𝉌Canaanite�ฒ��Yankees is Jewish is exaggerated for touristic purposes. But there is definitely a Jewish connection in 𝉌Canaanite�ฒ��Yankees. It was where a lot of Jewish people went after, because the king of Morocco actually saved the lives of many Jews during the Holocaust. You can learn all about it on my YouTube channels.
Yeah, here, let me just go that real quick in case anyone wants to see that. So yeah, definitely everyone check out. It's funny because wait, what was like? Sorry, I'm like I don't even know what I'm saying. It's
I
like
have a called Josh's Journeys, if you can find that. It should be linked. That's one has a lot of my stuff from Morocco because I keep getting banned. The next ban is going to be permanent. There's going to be no more Kohan Killetz channel, and there's going to be no appeal.
Well, have you made do you have a backup of all your videos?
I think I have a backup. What was that? There's another service that you can automatically save your videos to, or like sync your videos to. But I'm not sure if that saves it if your channel gets deleted.
Because
no, it wasn't Rumble. It was, forget which one it was.
But yeah, I would definitely back up all your videos. That way that the ones that are not going to get you banned, or, the ones that are less controversial, you could repost without any.
I back up the ones that are important to me on my computer. But the reality is I don't know which ones are going to get me banned. The last one was a picture of a 17th century picture of Samson and Delilah, where I was making cartoonish voices acting out the scene. So if that gets banned, I don't think any of my content is really safe. So, well, we'll see. I'm on deletion of my channel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. It kind of feels like they were just that YouTube was just trying to use that as an excuse.
Yeah, well, that's how it is. But it's their platform. And after all, corporations have the free speech to limit our free speech because they're the people who are actually.
Yeah. What was that about living in a feudalistic system?
You have to allow corporations freedom of speech because they're people. And their freedom of speech means they should have the right to limit our freedom of speech. And because their freedom of speech is so much more important to the world than ours. We're just normal people. They're Google or Amazon or whatever. Their free speech matters far more than us because they have more money to bribe politicians. And this is as it should be. We love you.
But see, they're not limiting your speech. They're just saying that if you want to speak, you're not allowed to speak in their house, which is basically the same thing because their house has basically become the public square now.
Yeah, their house is everywhere. And they legally limit their competition. Like I would eat my shoe if they didn't have some rule in the TikTok ban, because TikTok was their last real competitor. And
Wait,
I wouldn't.
They have a rule that you can't eat your shoe?
No, I'm saying if they didn't have an involvement in the TikTok ban, I would eat my shoe.
Wait, if who didn't? YouTube, you're saying?
Google, which owns YouTube.
Yeah.
YouTube is Google's cash cow.
Yep. But anyway, like I was saying, we could talk forever. So on that note, I think that's a good place to end off.
Good night.
All right, take care.
Wah!
See, where is it?
How do I save?
Oh, here.
أبا كذا يقح بحمري بطل يمسك بمسكين كما يمد ويشير منزلات بعد نائمي يشير بعسير طبقاني البالي بتزاني راتي تسفاني يتمير مالو بناتي ينو بدرايا بالتعاري أقونا طلايا بالتريبي بدرو يدعى إما كلاتي كنياتي شقيونه يفنو كسواديه كالبنا مeticulously بكارا بازوما رودنا متشاميني بكارا بازوما رودنا متشاميني كاسا كوتشيلا تبحينا وجتاتو كالبنا لتانو أتيراتو البكتة يفتح بحامري متى ينسك بمسكه كما يمد ويشير مسلة من بعد نائمي يشير يازر طابقني البالي بتساريراتي تسفاني يتمير بالو بناته ينو بدرايا بالتعاري أبونا طلايا بالتربي بدرو يدا إما كلاتي كنياتي 𝉴Canaanite𝓀ษ์بحرب ملوحة قد سمريه نادى يشر ويشقيونه يفنو كسبديه كالبنا مeticulously بكارا بازوما رودنا متشاميني كاسا كوتشيلا تبخينا وجتاتو كربنا لتنو أتيراتو أبا كدا يقحو بحمري بطا ينسك بمسكيه كما يمد ويشير منزلات بعد نائمي يشير بعسير طبقاني البالي بتزاني راتي تسفاني يتمير مالو بناتي ينو بدرايا بالتعاري أقونا طلايا بالتريبي بدرو يدعى إما كلاتي كنياتي شقيونه يفنو كسواديه كالبنا مeticulously بكارا بازوما رودنا متشاميني بكارا بازوما رودنا متشاميني كاسا كوتشيلا تبحينا وجتاتو كالبنا لتانو أتيراتو البكتة يفتح بحامري متى ينسك بمسكه كما يمد ويشير مسلة من بعد نائمي يشير يازر طابقني البالي بتساريراتي تسفاني يتمير بالو بناته ينو بدرايا بالتعاري أبونا طلايا بالتربي بدرو يدا 𝉌Canaanite𓀺Yankees.